We're excited to have Andrew Sutherland presenting today on fall pests in California. Dr. Andrew Sutherland is an Urban IPM Advisor for the San Francisco Bay Area. He was UCANR's first cooperative extension advisor tasked with addressing urban pests, both structural and industrial, and serving urban pest management professionals. His program helps develop new and evaluate existing IPM strategies and tactics for key urban pests. As an entomologist, his focus is on urban pest insects, including bedbugs, termites, and cockroaches. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. You may now share your slides and begin.
Okay. So this is part of a series of webinars that I've done with the Urban and Community Group. I like highlighting multiple pest systems so that we don't get bored, and I like doing so in a seasonal capacity. Everybody's so busy, we may be focused on the pests we see today, not the pests that we will see in the spring or summer. So I have done pests during spring, and I think I've done pests during summer. So this will be the third installment, pests during fall in California. All right. And thanks for the introduction, Belinda. Just a little bit more. I am the Urban IPM Cooperative Extension Advisor in the San Francisco Bay Area. I serve 5 counties here, and the mission statement for my program is we work with professionals to improve pest control through research and education in order to protect our communities and the environment. And so that's really important. These pest management professionals are providing service to the communities, and a lot of the pest management that we do in urban areas has to do with public health as well as protection of the environment. Okay, so let's talk about the scope of this presentation. It really has to do with California, and that's important because California has a very unique climate. The rainfall comes in the cool season. And so in this image, these are the coastal East Bay Hills as you might see them towards the end of the summer or perhaps the beginning of autumn. And the rainfall has not really begun. It's the driest time of the year, but this quickly changes. And so here we are in the middle of autumn, actually approaching winter within about 1 month, and these hills are starting to green up. If you look at these hills in February or March, they're going to be almost fluorescent green, and there's a lot of moisture available at that time. And so this is a unique climate for all of the organisms that live here. And they look forward to this period when water becomes available, but also temperatures start to decrease. And so you see a lot of unique behaviors that you might not see in the same organisms in a different climate. So I come from Florida, where it actually rains almost every day in the summertime. And our driest part of the year is the winter. And so it's the opposite of what we have here in California. So when my mom visits in the summertime, she says, "Son, why is everything dead?" And I have to explain to her that, well, it doesn't really rain here from April to October. But now is probably my favorite time of the year in California because things are greening up and waking up. It's almost as if our spring and autumn are reversed. This is spring in many ways for a lot of our plants and animals that we have here. It's also important to think about your home. So your home creates a microclimate of its own. It's much warmer, especially indoors, than it is outside in the fall and winter. It's also much drier. So our home creates this dome of heat that extends just to the perimeter and a little bit beyond the perimeter of the home. And it also creates a barrier against moisture, especially if the home property is graded properly. Water moves away from the home, and so it's much drier underneath the home and in the immediate area around the home. And so this is important for animals that are seeking refuge from the cold or from the wet. And several of the examples I'll provide today the insects in this case are doing exactly that. They're looking for shelter, and in the absence of a home, that shelter may historically have been a rock pile, a cliff, a hollow tree, perhaps space underneath loose bark in a tree. And so our homes provide that same service to these animals looking to get out of the cold and wet. So we're going to cover four different categories of common pests that we see in autumn. First will be a general category of overwintering insects. Some people call these seasonal nuisance pests, or professionals also often call them occasional invaders. So really that means they're only occasionally coming inside, and in this case, it's happening in a specific season. Similarly, we'll talk about seasonal ant invasions. One of our most common ant species in California, the Argentine ant, is known to enter structures when its habitat outside gets too wet in the beginning of the wet season. Then we'll move into subterranean termites. So there's actually several species of subterranean termites in California that swarm in autumn. And that's very unique. Most termites swarm in spring or summer, but I think it's due to our unique climate. Water is available in autumn and winter, so it doesn't make as much sense for subterranean termites to swarm in spring or summer when the water's not available. So we'll talk about what this means if you are seeing subterranean termites swarming on or near your property. And then we'll finally talk about everybody's favorite, fat, juicy lawn grubs. So these are the larvae of scarab beetles, and they have an interesting annual life cycle. But the important thing here for our autumn season is that the grubs are full size, getting ready to pupate, and they become very attractive to vertebrate animals that may eat them or want to eat them. In order to eat these guys, they have to dig up our turf, causing considerable damage. And this is largely an autumn and winter problem in California. So lots of insects overwinter as adults. The adult stage is able to rest and really lie dormant for a while during the winter, waiting for the warmer temperatures of spring. And a lot of the mating occurs in spring, egg laying occurs in spring. So these adult insects are looking for a place to ride out the winter. And so some of these may include ladybird beetles, which we see as beneficial oftentimes in the garden or landscape, but in the winter, they're not eating and they overwinter as adults. They like to aggregate, which means that they like to cluster together, and this behavior may help them to regulate temperature. It also may help them to find mates as soon as spring comes and they warm up a little bit. So they may actually enter structures to overwinter. Flies, same story. A number of different flies, including cluster flies, bottle flies, some blowflies, overwinter as adults and can get inside your home in autumn, and they will rest there all winter. And so sometimes when the temperature starts to warm in January, February, we have kind of fool's spring, they call it. You'll see these flies wake up and start buzzing around your home, and you'll wonder, where did this fly come from? But it's actually been resting perhaps in a crevice or behind a wall covering somewhere, waiting for warm temperatures. Bugs, and so these are insects that have piercing, sucking mouth parts, are also known to aggregate and overwinter as adults. And most people don't think about these guys, but mated queens of social wasps. So these may be yellow jackets, paper wasps, or even some of the hornets that we have. The mated females are the only life stage to survive the winter time. They have an annual cycle, but she has to find a safe place to wait out the cold winter and get ready for spring, where she's going to establish a new nest. So all of these insects can look to enter your home in autumn in order to survive the winter. And many of them aggregate. So here's your ladybird beetles. In this case, these are Harmonia, known sometimes as the multicolored Asian ladybird beetle, very large ladybird beetle, and they often are found in these aggregations. They have a unique odor, which can actually foul indoor furnishings. In the middle, this is a post from one of my LinkedIn connections in the United Kingdom showing an aggregation of flies. And so these are adult flies that were active outside the structure, but they found their way in and they're starting to aggregate in preparation for overwintering. And then finally on the right here, this is an aggregation of brown marmorated stink bugs. And this photo was taken in Russia, in Northern Europe, but we have this species here, and it will aggregate like this in California. And so these are adult stink bugs that, again, are entering structures in order to survive the winter and aggregating in order to uh, uh, control their temperature, or let's say modulate their temperature and be ready for mating in the spring. So what can you do about this? One thing, especially with our true bugs, is we can try to avoid or prevent large populations developing outside near homes. And so there are certain tree species that are known to attract these stink bugs, as well as box elder bugs. So box elder bug was the one I showed here, the third image, true bugs. That's a box elder bug. These are plant feeding bugs, and so they are attracted to certain plants. And especially if you have a tree that's attractive, you may have an aggregation of these insects in late summer, early fall, before they move into structures. So this is a risk factor, we know, for your home becoming infested by these aggregations. So it could be that if we're planting a landscape, we may seek to avoid one of these tree species. If we have a perennial problem year after year with these bugs invading our homes and we can't exclude them properly, we may consider even removing some of these plant species. One of these trees in my list here, Ailanthus, is also known as tree of heaven, and this is an invasive species, highly attractive to brown marmorated stink bug. So in this case, you have a pest tree that's attracting large populations of a pest insect. What else could you do? Well, this is very effective. We can try to exclude pests from entering our structures. And so this is done by screening our windows properly. And you'd be surprised how many of your screens are ripped or damaged if you start taking a look. Also, the seals that are around the windows. This is really important. If you have sliding glass doors, there are special sealing products you can buy to seal the gap between those two door panels. Um, Door sweeps. So in the bottom left, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but there's this blue exterior door. And there's a simple device called a door sweep that can be installed, and it closes that gap between the door and the ground. And this is effective all year long and keeps out crawling pests like cockroaches and spiders, not to mention rodents, but it can be really helpful in autumn if you have true bugs or ladybird beetles seeking to aggregate within your home. You can also physically remove these insects once they find their way in. And there are actually special vacuum cleaners that are sold and marketed for stink bug removal. And they're increasingly popular on the East Coast, where we have even larger populations of these stink bugs. Other kinds of physical removal may include sweeping aggregations of ladybird beetles or bugs into a pot of soapy water. That's going to kill them, but it's also going to remove them from that aggregation, where, remember, they may cause odors or stains on your home finishings. And I wanted to include this little video here. Exclusion is important all year long. And so this is a photo on the right of a vent screen cover for a raised foundation. And this is standard 1/4 inch steel mesh. And in this case, a Turkestan cockroach female has become trapped. And so even this large mesh size can be very effective at preventing access, in this case, out of the crawl space from this insect. And so if you want to learn more about these seasonal nuisance pests, or specifically the brown marmorated stink bug, we do have some resources through UC IPM that will help and kind of reinforce this presentation here, and help you focus on those non-chemical exclusion and physical removal tactics that are really effective, really the only effective ways to reduce this kind of seasonal invasion. So moving on, another kind of invasion, ant invasions. Argentine ants especially are known to invade structures. In this case, this is a bathroom at a public park, but they also will readily invade homes. And certain times of the year, they're looking for food or water, but in autumn, they're looking for a place that's out of the cold and damp. And so they're looking for a place to move, in some cases, their larvae and eggs away from the saturated soil conditions that they cannot survive. Even vehicles can become invaded. So this was a pickup truck that was parked on top of a large Argentine ant nest, and the soil flooded after the first rain of the year. And so these ants moved directly up into the truck and established a temporary nest just to get out of the water. And there's research that shows that whether or not you have insecticide present at the site will not change this invasion behavior. So the only important factor, or probably the most important factor for this kind of ant invasion, is changes in the weather. And so in California, that means this time of year, when the soil first becomes saturated and inhospitable to Argentine ants, that's when they're most likely to enter homes. I should add there's a second time of the year when this can occur, and that's when the soil outside is the driest. So that's usually the end of the summer. So really August, September. But in the wintertime, when we get our first big rains, these ant invasions are increasingly common, and they drive a lot of unnecessary pesticide application. So what can you do? First, we can try to prevent ant invasions throughout the season, throughout the year. First, we can reduce moisture around our structures. And so we talked about proper grading already. And by reducing moisture around your structures, you will reduce the potential that Argentine ants will nest near the structure. And so if they're not nesting near the structure, they're not likely to invade the structure when conditions become inhospitable. Argentine ants feed on the sugary exudates, or excrement really, of sap-sucking insects in the landscape. And this includes aphids, mealybugs, soft-scale insects, whitefly insects. And so if we are able to manage or reduce their populations, we will actually impact the ant populations. These ants need these sap-sucking insects to really thrive. We can also remove other sources of food that may be outside. And so it's important to realize that Argentine ants live and breed outside. They don't really want to be in your home. They just enter the home because they have large populations nearby and they need to escape cold, damp, or in the case of summer, hot and dry. We can also seek to seal structural gaps. So in the image on the bottom, we're sealing the gap produced by a pipe penetration through a masonry wall. And so these little gaps are exploited by ants when they're looking for a place to hide and get away from the rain. And I will say it's easier said than done because these ants are small and they don't need much of a gap in order to enter our structures. A lot of people use insecticide sprays for ants, but it's unclear whether this is effective in the long term. When you have an ant invasion driven by the environment, those ants may not be affected by the pesticide spray, or more likely, they will die inside the home. So, if the goal is to keep the ants out in the first place, I would argue that the liquid insecticide sprays are not that effective. Furthermore, these insecticide sprays may not be environmentally sustainable. So most of the common insecticides used for ant control are identified as surface water contaminants. So that means they wash off of hard surfaces into storm drain systems, urban creeks, and they can significantly impact the ecosystem there. And so as a result, the state of California has a number of different restrictions and regulations on how these materials can be used. In fact, the most effective of these liquid insecticides, fipronil, cannot be applied during the wet season. And so as of November 15th, this material cannot be used, or maybe it's November 1st. Either way, we're in the period now when you cannot use this most effective liquid insecticide targeting ants. So what do we do instead? Consider using baits. And I will say that these baits are most effective in the spring and summer. And that's when the ants are actively foraging for food. And the reason that these baits work is they're slow acting. Ants are social animals. They share their food. So if you're able to introduce a slow acting toxin, it gets shared and affects more and more insects until it eventually can affect the entire colony. Also, these kinds of insecticides are much less likely to negatively impact human health or the environment. So, for instance, these are not considered surface water contaminants, and in theory, the only way that they leave the source of application is within the body of the ant. These products are available in a lot of different formulations. For Argentine ant, the liquid formulations are especially effective, and they can be applied within bait stations, which are lock and key and, in theory, tamper proof. And so this further limits the potential for exposure. So, what do you do when the ants are invading your home? Because remember, insecticide application may not stop the invasion, especially right away. So we already talked about preventing large populations, and so this is most effective in spring and summer. So the work that you do baiting ants in spring and summer is going to pay off in fall and winter when you have these invasions. So long-term baiting programs, in some cases, if you can identify nests, you can treat the actual nest. Exclusion is very important. We're always looking for places where ants are entering the home. We're using proper sealants, proper products to seal up those gaps and defects. If you do find ants inside, the best thing to do is to remove them and remove their pheromone trails with a simple soapy water spray. This can also be done with vinegar. And basically, what you're doing is denaturing the trail pheromones. So you're killing the ants with soap and water, but you're also erasing their signal, which tells other ants it's a good place to go. And I would say just be patient. These ant invasions will go away on their own. As soon as conditions outside become less inhospitable, the ants want to go back out. They actually prefer to be outside, at least this species does. There's an excellent video that highlights these steps that you can find on our YouTube channel. All right, let's move on. Subterranean termites. These are native insects. They're very, very common, but you almost never see them. And that's because they're cryptic. They live underground, as their name suggests. So if you look at this little cartoon in my image here with the pink shading, this pink shading represents the hypothetical extent of a subterranean termite colony. So perhaps the colony starts in a dead root here at the base of this tree, but those termites establish tunnels looking for resources. And so they may find other wood or cellulose resources, and they may act structure if the structure is not properly safeguarded. So I will also say that we usually see subterranean termites when they swarm. And so this is the one time of the year when we have winged forms of termites produced, and they actually leave the subterranean colony and fly up into the air or fly nearby. They shed their wings and they couple up in order to start new colonies. And so a colony of subterranean termites, which may include hundreds of thousands of insects, starts from just two lovers, a king and a queen. They start the entire colony. So subterranean termites in California are unique because they actually swarm in autumn. There are some species, especially along the coast, that are known to swarm after the first autumn rain. And if you go to iNaturalist, which is a kind of a civic science um, observation platform online, you can see that the observations fall under these two broad peaks, spring and fall. So we have some species of subterranean termites that swarm in the spring and others that swarm in the fall. And this is interesting because up until recently, we considered these all to be the same species. But in fact, recent research has revealed the presence of at least one and perhaps two or three unnamed or undescribed cryptic species within the Reticulotermes hesperus species complex. So one of these, I was lucky enough to be part of a group that described a new species this year. This was just published this summer. And so the species that we have described has been named Reticulotermes rusty. And this is an honor, an homage to UC Riverside professor Michael Rust, pictured in the bottom right here. So this species is known to occur between Santa Barbara and San Diego, and probably down into Baja California. And it's really unique in that it does swarm after the first autumn rain. And so this is happening right now. In fact, 2 days ago, my colleague down in Riverside posted on LinkedIn that he observed a large swarm of Reticulotermes rusty. And so you may be seeing this in your neighborhood and wondering, what's going on? What are these insects? If you know that they're termites, you may wonder, is my home infested? What do I do about this? And this is a common occurrence. People see these swarming termites and they want to know what's happening. And so most years I get contacted by the media, and there's all kinds of stories out there. I did a live interview back in 2021 about these fall swarming termites in the Bay Area. Also, this swarming season is somewhat predictable. And so one year we actually partnered with the KQED video program Deep Look, and we were able to capture the swarm event here in the East Bay. And so we had the videographers visit our site, and there's this incredible video that you can see on YouTube that documents the occurrence, but also documents how the other animals in the environment respond. So you see birds coming to eat the termites. You see lizards coming to eat the termites. Even spiders. Everyone is cued in to this emergence and this availability of food. So it's a really, really incredible video that they were able to capture right here at one of our research stations. So again, here's the big question. What do you do about it? Well, as an entomologist, I would tell you just watch and enjoy. It's really cool to watch the insects come out of the ground, pair up, they're falling in love, and it's cool to witness that. But the biggest worry people have is whether or not their home is infested or vulnerable to attack. So if this swarm is happening inside your home, that is a sign that yes, your home is infested by a mature subterranean termite colony. But if it's occurring some distance away from your home, let's say 5 feet, 10 feet, or more from your home, it does not necessarily mean that your home is infested. But it does tell you that under the ground, at that spot where you observed the swarm, there is a mature subterranean termite colony. And we know that these termite colonies can forage for long distances, 50 to 100 feet from where you might have seen that swarm. So it's a great idea to get a professional termite inspection if you see a swarm on your property. If the termite inspection reveals that your home is infested, or it reveals that the termites are present right up next to your home, threatening your home, you may consider professional termite control service. And one of the services that we have evaluated recently is bait. Just like with the ants, the termites share food, and you can eliminate entire termite colonies using these tactics. Okay, on to our final case here, lawn grubs. Now, if you have grown turf or in some cases ornamental plants, you may have seen these grubs. And so they're C-shaped, soft-bodied, very plump and juicy. They do have 6 legs attached to their thorax, and they have these pretty strong yellowish orange sclerotized heads with strong mandibles. And what they do is they eat the roots of the turf grass. So if you have a lot of them, they can actually damage your turf. But oftentimes, there aren't enough to damage the turf, but they can become very attractive to animals that like to dig them up and eat them. And that's because when they're the largest, they're fully grown, ready to pupate, they're also sedentary. So they form a little cell under the ground where they will pupate and kind of wait for spring when they emerge as adults. And so they're vulnerable to predation at this point. So here's the simplified life cycle here. You may have seen the adults flying around in May, June, July. They're called June bugs in many places because they fly in June. They're little scarab beetles, medium brown. You can actually monitor for them around exterior lighting. Any light that gives off ultraviolet is going to attract these insects. So if you're on your porch in June or July and you see them buzzing around, you know that they're also laying eggs in the turf. And so the larvae then hatch from the eggs that are laid. They burrow down into the turf root zone, and they feed on all kinds of different turf species. And then, as I mentioned, they overwinter as mature larvae in these little cells that they form. So here you see this kind of spherical cell that a larva has formed and pupated within. And then here's the adult emerging in mid-spring. And so the real problem here is that these grubs are especially attractive to different vertebrate animals, different vertebrate predators. So we see raccoons, skunks, all kinds of birds, including geese and crows. go for these grubs. We've also seen problems with wild hogs. In certain areas of California, we have these feral pigs or wild hogs, and they will come down at night and completely destroy turf areas in search of grubs. So this is the major problem and really what we're trying to prevent in autumn and winter. So what can you do about this? Um, Unfortunately, most of the effective tactics for use against the grubs themselves are to be used in spring and summer. And actually, if you go all the way back to lawn design and turf species selection, there's some prevention that can be done. So if we are selecting species that will not be stressed in our climate, if we are providing proper irrigation and proper removal of thatch, which is the accumulation of dead leaves, dead blades of grass, then we can help our turf areas sustain grub damage. We can also enable the natural enemies of these grubs to get down into the soil where they live and help us control them. In the spring and summer, you can also start thinking about monitoring for lawn grubs. And that way, you know if you have a developing problem and you have time to make a treatment if necessary before autumn comes. And the reason is because in autumn, these grubs are not feeding, so it's much more difficult to control them. It's really only effective in spring and summer. And you can do this with conventional insecticides, but also entomopathogenic nematodes can be very effective against these grubs, especially if you have a sandier soil with large pores that allows the nematodes to swim around and find the grubs that are down there. But again, this is not going to be that effective when they're full grown and already attractive to vertebrates. So if you've done all this and you're still having problems with raccoons or other animals digging up these grubs, we could try to exclude the vertebrate animals. And so that's proper fencing, um, and actually a device which is really interesting to me is motion activated sprinklers. So these sprinklers can frighten away the animals that are trying to dig into the turf and get these grubs. And finally, if you're not able to deal with this problem on your own, you could hire a professional trapping service. And it's important to utilize a professional. They're properly trained, they have the right equipment, they understand safety when working around wild animals. Also, wild animals cannot be legally released somewhere else. So a lot of people will trap a raccoon, but then they don't know what to do with it. You can't legally take that somewhere else and release it. And so the professionals are better equipped to deal with that problem. We have a number of resources at UC IPM to help you select proper turf species, maintain your turf areas, prevent lawn insects from becoming a problem, and then control them if they do become a problem. And then here's a video of these motion activated sprinklers in action. So the raccoon's looking for grubs, his motion activates the sprinkler, and perhaps this raccoon won't come back to this yard. The same yard uh, had a possum, also probably looking for grubs or some other food resource. And so this can be a very effective tactic when used against vertebrate animals, which do learn and avoid situations like this. So, in wrapping up here, I wanted to remind everybody that the UC IPM Home and Landscape section is just a wealth of information and resources, and you can surf around and find answers to all of your pest problems any time of the year using this amazing resource. One resource I wanted to highlight is fairly new. It was published a couple of years ago, and it's called Hiring a Pest Control Company. So if you decide that you're dealing with a situation like a potential termite infestation or maybe wildlife that's tearing up your property or nesting in your crawl space, you may need help from a professional. And so this guideline helps you to consider what kinds of professionals will be best equipped to help you, whether or not they're practicing the process of IPM. And I think it's a very helpful resource. It includes a flow chart here, which helps you understand whether a professional will be helpful in your case or not. So check it out. That's all I've got for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew, for discussing the prevention and management of household pests for the fall. That was great.